To the Harrington dynasty, Adela Bennett was merely background noise, a woman who spent 3 years scrubbing their floors while remaining utterly invisible to New York's elite. But their arrogance proved fatal when a predatory lawsuit meant to claim her apartment forced Adela into the light. She didn't enter the courtroom as a servant, but as the protector of a secret kept for 20 years. The Harringtons thought they understood power, but watch them crumble when the judge reveals that the woman they tried to crush is the sole heiress to a fortune that dwarfs their own. The collision was silent, but the shattering of glass that followed sounded like a gunshot in the hush of the ballroom. Adela Bennett froze. At her feet lay the shards of a Ming dynasty vase, its blue and white porcelain scattered across the Persian rug like jagged teeth. Red wine, spilled from the tray she had been holding, bled into the wool, inching toward the priceless silk hem of Beatrice Harrington's dress. The music stopped. The chatter of Manhattan's elite, CEOs, senators, and hedge fund managers, died instantly. 300 pairs of eyes turned to look at the maid in the black and white uniform. "You clumsy, incompetent little rat," Beatrice Harrington hissed. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the terrifying weight of a woman who had never been told no in her 60 years of life. Adela dropped to her knees, her hands trembling as she reached for the shards. "Mrs. Harrington, I am so sorry. I tripped. Someone bumped my arm." "Don't you dare lie to me," Beatrice snapped, kicking a shard toward Adela. It grazed Adela's hand, drawing a bead of blood. "That vase was appraised at $400,000. It has been in my husband's family since the 1920s. Richard Harrington, Beatrice's son, and a man whose only accomplishment was being born, swirled his scotch nearby. He let out a cruel, barking laugh. "Looks like your wages are garnished for the next what? 3 lifetimes, Adela?" Adela looked up, her eyes stinging. She had worked for the Harringtons for 3 years. She knew their secrets. She knew Richard was laundering money through his art gallery. She knew Beatrice hadn't slept in the same room as her husband in a decade. But right now, she was just the help. Expendable. "Get out," Beatrice said, her voice icy. "You're fired. And don't think for a second you're walking away from this. I will have my lawyers draft the papers by morning. You will pay for every cent of this damage, even if I have to take that rotting brownstone your grandmother lives in." The blood drained from Adela's face. The brownstone in Queens was all they had. It was the only thing keeping her grandmother, Martha, out of a state-run nursing home. "Please, Mrs. Harrington," Adela begged, ignoring the humiliation of pleading in front of New York's high society. "Take my final pay. I'll work for free. Please don't touch my grandmother's house." Beatrice signaled to the security team. 2 large men in suits stepped forward, grabbing Adela by the arms. "Drag her out," Beatrice said, turning her back to address her guests, a fake smile plastered on her face. "Apologies, everyone. It seems good help is impossible to find these days." Adela was thrown out of the service entrance into the cold October rain. She had no coat, no severance, and a debt hanging over her head that was larger than everything she would ever earn. The lawsuit arrived 3 days later. It wasn't just a demand for payment. It was an execution. Superior Court of New York Plaintiff, the Harrington Family Trust Defendant, Adela Bennett. Claim: destruction of property, emotional distress, loss of historical asset. Damages sought, $650,000. Adela sat at her small kitchen table, the legal documents shaking in her hands. Across from her sat a court-appointed public defender named David Ross. He looked exhausted, his tie loose, coffee stains on his shirt. "I'm going to be honest with you, Adela," David said, rubbing his temples. "It's bad. They hired Sullivan and Cromwell. Do you know who they are?" They're sharks. They don't lose against people like, well, us. I can't pay this, Adela whispered. They know that, David said grimly. They're filing a lien on your property. They want the brownstone. Apparently the Harringtons are developing a new luxury complex in Queens, and your grandmother's house is right in the middle of their proposed parking lot. The vase? It was just an excuse. They were waiting for you to slip up. Adela felt a cold rage settle in her stomach. It wasn't an accident. Richard had bumped her arm. She remembered it now. The slight shove, the smirk. It was a setup. They wanted the land, and they destroyed her life to get it. I have until the hearing next Tuesday? She asked. Technically, yes, David said, packing up his briefcase. But unless you have $500,000 hidden in a mattress, start packing. I'm sorry, Adela. David left, leaving Adela alone in the dim light of the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator seemed deafening. She put her head in her hands and sobbed. Adela? The voice was frail. Adela wiped her eyes quickly and turned. Her grandmother, Martha, was standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on her walker. Grandma, go back to bed. I'm just handling some bills, Adela lied. Martha didn't move. Her eyes, usually clouded with age, were sharp and clear tonight. I heard the man. Adela. They want the house. They want to crush you. I'll fix it, Adela said, her voice breaking. You can't fix this with a mop, child, Martha said. She walked over, her steps slow but determined, and placed a withered hand on Adela's shoulder. It's time. I promised your mother I wouldn't tell you until you were 25, or until the wolves came to the door. Well, the wolves are here. What are you talking about? Go to the attic, Martha commanded. Behind the loose brick in the chimney, there is a steel lock box. The key is around my neck. She pulled a thin silver chain from her nightgown. Hanging from it was a small, intricate key that looked like it belonged to a jewelry box from a different century. What's in the box, Grandma? Money? Martha smiled, a sad, knowing smile. Something worth much more than money, Adela. It's your name. The attic smelled of cedar and old dust. Rain hammered against the roof as Adela pried the loose brick away from the chimney. Her heart was pounding. She had lived in this house her entire life, believing her parents were nobodies. 2 young lovers who died in a car crash on the I-95, leaving her with nothing but debts and love. She found the box. It was heavy, made of dark, polished steel, with a crest engraved on the lid, a falcon clutching a spear. Her hands trembling, Adela inserted the key. The lock clicked with a satisfying, heavy thunk, the sound of precision engineering. She opened it. Inside there was no cash, no gold bars, just a stack of documents, yellowed with age, and a thick envelope sealed with red wax. She picked up the envelope first. On the front, in elegant cursive, was written, "To my daughter, Adela. Read this first." She tore it open. My dearest Adela, if you are reading this, I have failed to keep you safe from the world I ran away from. You know me as Mary Bennett, a seamstress. But that was a life I chose to escape a cage made of gold. My real name was Marianne Blackwood. I am the only daughter of Tobias Blackwood. Adela stopped reading. She gasped, the air leaving her lungs. Tobias Blackwood wasn't just a name. It was the name. The Blackwood Group controlled shipping lanes, pharmaceutical patents, and half the real estate in Manhattan. They were old money, the kind of money that didn't just buy politicians, it bought countries. She continued reading, her vision blurring. I fell in love with your father, a simple mechanic. My family forbade it. They threatened to destroy him. So we ran. I walked away from the Blackwood fortune, the legacy, everything. I wanted you to grow up free, not a pawn in their boardrooms. But I knew they might come for you one day, or that life might be cruel. So, before I left, I made a deal with the family attorney, a man named Arthur Lewis. I retained my personal shares in the family trust, shares that cannot be revoked. They are yours, Adela. You are the majority shareholder of the Blackwood Sovereign Trust. Use this power only if you must. It is a sword, not a shield. Be careful. Love, Mum. Adela sat back on her heels, the letter shaking in her hand. She wasn't just Adela Bennett, the maid. She was Adela Blackwood. She dug through the rest of the papers. There was a birth certificate. Adela Blackwood, born Zurich, Switzerland. And there was a business card, thick and creamy, with gold embossing. Arthur Lewis Senior Partner, Lewis, Cooper and Davis, 55 Wall Street, NY Private Line, 212-5555-001199. It was 2:00 a.m. Adela didn't care. She grabbed her cracked smartphone and dialed the number. It rang once. "This is the private line of Arthur Lewis," a crisp British voice answered. It wasn't a voicemail. "Who is this?" "My name is Adela," she said, her voice shaking. I have a letter from Marianne." There was a silence on the other end, a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped turning. "Marianne?" The old man's voice cracked. "My God, we have been looking for you for 20 years, child. Where are you?" "I'm in Queens," Adela said, "and I'm in trouble. The Harringtons. They're trying to take my home." A low, dark chuckle came from the other end of the line. It was the sound of a lion waking up. "The Harringtons?" Arthur Lewis asked, his voice dripping with sudden, terrifying amusement. "Beatrice Harrington, that social climbing vulture?" "Yes," Adela said. "They're suing me for a vase. They want to take everything." "Adela," Arthur said, his tone shifting to pure steel, "do not say a word to them. Do not sign anything. Be at my office at 8 a.m. sharp. Bring the box. And Adela, yes? Wear something comfortable. You have a very long day of empire building ahead of you. The Harringtons aren't just going to lose this lawsuit. By the time we are done with them, they will be lucky if they still own the clothes on their backs." Adela hung up. She looked at her reflection in the dusty attic window. The frightened maid was gone. She stood up, clutching the box to her chest. She went downstairs, walked into the kitchen where the lawsuit papers still lay on the table. She picked up the pen. For a second, she thought about signing the settlement, about giving up. Then she remembered Beatrice's face. She remembered Richard's laugh. She took the lawsuit papers and dropped them into the trash can. "Grandma," she called out softly. "Yes, dear." "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we're going to Wall Street." The elevator ride to the 50th floor of the Lewis, Cooper and Davis building took less than 10 seconds, but for Adela, it felt like an eternity. She was wearing her best outfit, a navy blue blazer she'd bought at a thrift store, and a pair of slacks that were slightly too long. In the mirrored walls of the elevator, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman trying desperately to look like she belonged. The doors slid open, revealing a lobby that smelled of white lilies and money. "Ms. Bennett?" The receptionist didn't even look up from her screen initially, but when she did, her eyes widened. "Mr. Lewis is expecting you, immediately." Adela was ushered down a corridor lined with oil paintings of severe-looking men. At the end, double mahogany doors were pushed open. Arthur Lewis was not what she expected. He was 80 years old, sitting in a wheelchair behind a desk the size of a small car. He wore a three-piece suit that cost more than Adela's grandmother's house, but his eyes were young, sharp, blue, and currently filled with tears. "Marianne's face," he whispered, wheeling himself around the desk. You have her chin, and your grandfather's stubborn eyes. Mr. Lewis, Adela started, gripping the steel box. I don't know how all this works. I just need to save my house. Sit, child. Arthur gestured to a leather chair. First, coffee. Then, truth. For the next hour, Adela's world was deconstructed and rebuilt. Arthur verified the documents in the box with a speed that spoke of 20 years of preparation. He ran a quick DNA swab, though he said it was merely a formality for the board. The Blackwood Sovereign Trust, Arthur explained, sliding a thick binder across the desk, has been dormant, in a way, since your grandfather passed. A board of directors has run the day-to-day operations. They are greedy, unimaginative men. They have been praying you never surfaced. They currently believe the Blackwood line is extinct. How much is it worth? Adela asked, fearing the answer. Arthur smiled thinly. Adela, you don't own a bank account. You own the bank. Specifically, you own 51% of the voting stock in the Blackwood Group. We have controlling interests in shipping, pharmaceuticals, and urban development. Our conservative estimate of your personal net worth is somewhere in the region of $42 billion. Adela felt the room spin. She gripped the armrests. 40 billion? Give or take market fluctuations. Arthur dismissed the number with a wave of his hand. But wealth is boring. Leverage is fun. Now, let's discuss the Harringtons. Arthur pressed a button on his desk, and a large screen on the wall flickered to life. It displayed a complex web of companies. Beatrice and Richard Harrington, Arthur began, his voice dropping into a predator's growl. They project an image of old money. In reality, they are leveraged to the hilt. They live on credit. They borrow from Peter to pay Paul. He pointed a laser pointer at a company logo near the bottom of the web. Vanguard Capital. They are currently building the Harrington Heights luxury complex in Queens, the project they are trying to steal your grandmother's house for. To fund this, they took out a $300 million loan from Vanguard Capital last month. It's a balloon loan, high risk. Adela squinted at the screen. So? So, Arthur grinned, showing his teeth. Guess who owns Vanguard Capital? Adela looked from the screen to Arthur. We do? You do, Arthur corrected. As of this morning, when you sign these papers assuming control of the trust, you are effectively the Harringtons' landlord, their bank, and their executioner. Adela looked down at her hands that were rough from scrubbing Beatrice Harrington's floors, hands that Richard Harrington had laughed at. If I sign this, Adela said quietly, can I stop them? Adela, if you sign this, you can foreclose on their entire existence by lunch. Adela picked up the heavy fountain pen. The ink was black. She signed her name. Not Adela Bennett. Adela Blackwood. Arthur clapped his hands together. Excellent. Now we have a court hearing to attend. But first, he looked her up and down, frowning slightly. We cannot have the CEO of the Blackwood Group appearing in court wearing polyester. My stylist is waiting in the next room. I don't need fancy clothes, Adela argued. I want them to see me, the maid they fired. Oh, they will see you, Arthur assured her. But they need to understand that the maid died the moment they touched her family. Today, a queen walks into that courtroom, and queens dress for war. The Queen's County Superior Court was a dreary building, smelling of stale coffee and despair. Room 304 was packed. The Harringtons had leaked the story to the press, painting themselves as victims of a deranged, destructive employee. They wanted to make an example of Adela. Beatrice Harrington sat at the plaintiff's table, looking immaculate in a white Chanel suit. She wore oversized sunglasses, despite being indoors, and was whispering to her lead attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne, a lawyer known in New York as the Butcher for his aggressive tactics. Richard Harrington sat behind his mother, scrolling on his phone, looking bored. In the back of the room, Adela sat alone on the defendant's bench. She wore a simple black trench coat, buttoned to her chin, concealing her clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She looked small, defeated. "All rise," the bailiff droned. Judge Henry Watkins swept in. He was a man known for favoring the wealthy, often seen at the same charity galas as Beatrice. He glanced at Adela with thinly veiled annoyance. "Case number 4920, Harrington Family Trust versus Adela Bennett," the judge announced. "Let's make this quick. I have a tea time at 3. Thorne, the Harringtons' lawyer, stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, this case is simple. The defendant, a disgruntled former employee, maliciously destroyed a historical artifact valued at $500,000. We are asking for immediate summary judgment and the seizure of her assets, specifically the property at 42 Oak Street, to cover damages." "Objection," a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. It wasn't the court-appointed public defender. The double doors at the back of the room swung open. Arthur Lewis rolled in, his wheelchair electric, humming softly. Flanking him were 6 associates in matching charcoal suits, carrying briefcases that looked like they contained nuclear codes. The room went silent. Even Judge Watkins froze. Arthur Lewis was a legend. He hadn't stepped inside a courtroom in 15 years. "Mr. Lewis?" The judge blinked, confused. "To what do we owe this honor? Are you lost?" "I am not lost, Henry," Arthur said, his voice projecting without a microphone. "I am here to represent the defendant, Miss Bennett." Beatrice Harrington spun around in her seat. Her sunglasses slid down her nose. "You?" she scoffed. "Why would Arthur Lewis represent a cleaning lady?" "That," Arthur said, parking his wheelchair next to Adela, "is a question you should have asked yourself before you sued her." Arthur nodded to Adela. Slowly, Adela stood up. She unbuttoned the black trench coat and let it slide off her shoulders. Underneath, she wasn't wearing the thrift store blazer. She was wearing a tailored, slate-grey power suit that screamed bespoke Italian tailoring. On her wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch. Around her neck was the Blackwood crest, a diamond and sapphire pendant that caught the fluorescent court lights and threw blue fire across the room. The transformation was physical. Her posture shifted. She didn't look like a maid. She looked like she owned the building. "Who is paying for this?" Richard hissed loud enough for the room to hear. "She stole that jewelry." "Quiet, Richard," Beatrice snapped, a flicker of genuine fear entering her eyes for the first time. She knew jewelry, and she knew that pendant was real. "Your Honor," Arthur continued, ignoring the Harringtons, "we are moving to dismiss this lawsuit with prejudice. Furthermore, we are filing a countersuit for wrongful termination, defamation, and—" He paused for dramatic effect. "Attempted fraud." "Fraud?" Thorne, the opposing lawyer, shouted. "This is outrageous. My client is a pillar of the community." "Your client," Adela spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, low, and terrifyingly steady. "Is broke." The gallery gasped. Beatrice stood up, her face turning red. "How dare you! I am a Harrington." "Sit down, Mrs. Harrington," the judge ordered, banging his gavel. He looked at Adela with new interest. "Explain yourself, young lady." Adela walked out from behind the table. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at Beatrice. "You sued me for a vase worth $400,000, Adela said. "But yesterday, I had an independent appraisal done based on the insurance photos you submitted." One of Arthur's associates handed a document to the judge. "The vase was a replica," Adela declared. Bought at an auction in 2015 for $5,000. You committed insurance fraud by claiming it was a Ming original. That's a felony, Beatrice. The blood drained from Beatrice's face. That's a lie. Is it? Adela asked. I have the receipt from the auction house. But that's small change. Let's talk about why you really want my grandmother's house. Adela turned to the gallery, addressing the reporters who were now furiously typing on their phones. The Harringtons are building a luxury tower, but they ran out of money 3 months ago. They need my land to secure the next round of funding. They staged the accident with the vase to force me into debt so they could seize the deed. Objection! Speculation! Thorne screamed, sweat beading on his forehead. It's not speculation if I own the debt, Adela said coldly. She signalled to Arthur. Arthur cleared his throat. Your Honour, as of 9 a.m. this morning, the Blackwood Sovereign Trust acquired Vanguard Capital. We now hold the mortgage on the Harrington estate, the loan for their construction project, and the liens on their personal vehicles. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. The name Blackwood hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Beatrice collapsed back into her chair. She looked at Adela, really looked at her, and saw the resemblance she had missed for 3 years. Blackwood? Beatrice whispered. You're Marianne's bastard. I am Adela Blackwood, Adela corrected her, her voice ringing like a bell. And I am calling in your loans, effectively, immediately. This court is in recess, Judge Watkins yelled, banging his gavel violently, sensing a disaster he didn't want to be part of. But nobody moved. Richard stood up, his face twisted in rage. He charged toward Adela. You little witch! You think you can buy us? The security guards moved, but Adela didn't flinch. She stood her ground, staring Richard down until he stopped a foot away from her, breathing heavily. I didn't buy you, Richard, Adela said softly, so only he and Beatrice could hear. I bought the cage you live in, and I'm about to lock the door. The raid happened at dawn, 2 days after the courtroom disaster. The sky over the Harrington estate in the Hamptons was a bruised purple, matching the mood inside the mansion. Beatrice Harrington sat in her silk robe in the grand foyer, clutching a cup of cold coffee. She refused to pack. She refused to believe it was happening. It's a scare tactic, she had told Richard the night before. The Blackwoods are old money. They are polite. They won't actually throw us onto the street. She was wrong. At 7 a.m., the iron gates at the end of the driveway swung open. But it wasn't the gardener's truck. It was a convoy. 3 black SUVs led the way, followed by a sheriff's department cruiser and 2 large moving trucks. They crunched up the gravel driveway, the sound like bones breaking. Beatrice stood up, her hands shaking. "Richard!" she screamed up the stairs. "Richard, get down here!" The front doors opened. Adela Blackwood walked in. She wasn't wearing a suit today. She was wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, looking deceptively casual. But behind her walked Arthur Lewis's team of foreclosure specialists and the sheriff of Suffolk County. "Mrs. Harrington," the sheriff said, tipping his hat awkwardly. He had attended Beatrice's Christmas party for 10 years. Now he was holding an eviction notice. "I have a court order executing the foreclosure clause on the Vanguard loan. You have 4 hours to vacate the premises." "Get out of my house!" Beatrice shrieked, throwing her coffee cup. It shattered against the wall, staining the expensive wallpaper. Adela watched the brown liquid drip down the wall. She didn't flinch. "Careful, Beatrice," Adela said calmly. "You're damaging my property." "Yours?" Beatrice spat. "You scrubbed these floors. You are nothing." "I did scrub these floors," Adela agreed, taking a step forward. Her voice was devoid of anger, which made it far more terrifying. I scrubbed them until my knees bled. I polished the silver you're trying to hide in your purse right now. And while I did that, you talked about me like I was furniture. You fired me for tripping, Beatrice. You tried to take my grandmother's home for a parking lot. Adela looked around the foyer. I don't want this house. It's cold and it's ugly. But I'm taking it because it's the only thing you love. Richard came bounding down the stairs, carrying a duffel bag stuffed with watches and cash. He tried to run past Adela toward the side door leading to the garage. Stop him, Adela said. 2 private security guards blocked Richard's path. Get out of my way, Richard yelled. I'm taking my Porsche. The Porsche is leased under the company name, Arthur Lewis said, stepping in from the porch. The company which is now a subsidiary of Blackwood Trust. The keys, Richard. Richard looked at Adela, his eyes pleading. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in a supermarket. Adela, come on. We grew up around each other. I used to sneak you food from the kitchen, remember? Adela looked at him with pity. You gave me leftovers because you were too lazy to throw them in the trash, Richard. Give them the keys. Defeated, Richard dropped the keys on the marble floor. For the next 4 hours, the Harrington dynasty was dismantled, box by box. The movers, instructed by Adela, were efficient. They packed only personal items, clothes, toiletries, family photos. Anything with significant monetary value, art, jewelry, furniture, was tagged as asset of the trust to pay off the massive debt the Harringtons had accrued. The staff, the cooks, the maids, the gardeners stood in the kitchen, watching nervously. They were Adela's former co-workers. They looked terrified. Adela walked into the kitchen. The room went silent. Miss Blackwood, Maria, the head cook, stammered. We didn't know. Adela smiled warmly, the first real smile she had shown all day. It's okay, Maria. I'm not firing anyone. She turned to the group. This estate is going to be converted into a foundation headquarters. I need a staff to run it. Your jobs are safe. In fact, everyone gets a 20% raise, effective immediately, and full health benefits. No more contractor nonsense. Maria burst into tears. The staff rushed forward, hugging Adela. Beatrice stood in the doorway, watching the people she had treated like dirt embrace the woman she had fired. Time to go, Mrs. Harrington, the sheriff said, gently taking Beatrice's arm. Beatrice and Richard walked out of the mansion, carrying 2 suitcases each. A taxi was waiting for them. Not a limo. A yellow taxi. As the cab pulled away, Beatrice looked back through the rear window. She saw Adela standing on the porch, not gloating, not waving, just watching. The maid had become the master, and the castle had fallen. The motel room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial lemon cleaner. It was a budget suite off the New Jersey Turnpike, the kind of place where the carpet felt damp, even when it was dry, and the neon sign outside buzzed with a headache-inducing hum. Beatrice Harrington stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, applying a layer of Chanel lipstick that cost more than the room itself. Her hand shook, just once, before she steeled herself. She smoothed the skirt of her silver Valentino gown, a dress she had worn to the opera 2 years ago. To the elite circles of Manhattan, wearing a dress twice was a social death sentence. But Beatrice had no choice. The closets in the Hamptons were empty, her wardrobe seized by the liquidators. "Mum, we can't do this!" Richard groaned from the edge of the sagging mattress. He was staring at his tuxedo shoes, which he had tried to polish with a napkin. "We're a joke, everyone knows." "Stand up, Richard," Beatrice snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We are Harringtons. We are not a joke. We are merely temporarily displaced." "We're homeless," Richard corrected her, his voice rising. Because of her, that maid. Which is exactly why we are going tonight, Beatrice hissed, spinning around. Her eyes were manic, burning with a desperate, terrifying energy. The Winter Solstice Gala is the most important event of the season. Everyone will be there. Senators, bankers, investors, and most importantly, Preston Clyde. Richard looked up. The shipping magnate? He hates the Blackwoods, Beatrice said, clutching her clutch purse as if it were a weapon. He's been trying to break their monopoly on the Atlantic trade routes for a decade. If we can get to him, if we can convince him that Adela is incompetent, that she's a fraud who will run the Blackwood Empire into the ground, he might back us. He has the capital to fund a countersuit. He can help us destroy her credibility. It's a suicide mission, Richard muttered. It's our only mission, Beatrice corrected. We have the tickets. I paid $10,000 a plate for them 6 months ago. They are non-refundable. We are going to walk into that museum, and we are going to take our lives back. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed into a kingdom of ice and light. The Temple of Dendur, an ancient Egyptian sandstone temple enclosed in a massive glass pavilion, served as the centerpiece. Icicles made of Swarovski crystals hung from the ceiling, catching the light and scattering rainbows across the crowd of New York's ultra-wealthy. When the Harringtons arrived, the air in the room shifted instantly. It started with a whisper near the entrance, then rippled outward like a shockwave. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. There was no warm greeting, no photographers flashing bulbs. Just a cold, heavy silence. Beatrice walked with her chin raised, gripping Richard's arm so tightly her nails dug into his suit jacket. She marched through the sea of people who used to be her friends. "Is that Beatrice?" a woman in emerald silk whispered loudly, not bothering to lower her voice. "I thought she was in exile." "I heard she's living in a motel," her husband chuckled. "Bold move, showing her face here." Beatrice stared straight ahead, her smile fixed and brittle. "Ignore them, Richard. They are sheep. Find Preston Clyde." They spotted him near the open bar, standing beneath a towering statue of the goddess Sekhmet. Preston Clyde was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, tall, broad, with silver hair and eyes that assessed the value of everything they touched. He was holding a martini and listening to a senator discuss tax loops. Beatrice made her move. She navigated the crowd with the precision of a shark, cutting off the senator. "Preston, darling," Beatrice purred, inserting herself into the circle. "It has been far too long." Preston Clyde looked down at her. He didn't smile. He took a slow sip of his drink. "Beatrice, I was under the impression you were otherwise engaged, with moving vans." The senator coughed to hide a laugh and excused himself. "A temporary inconvenience," Beatrice waved a hand dismissively, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Actually, Preston, we wanted to speak with you about a business opportunity regarding the Blackwood acquisition." Preston raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware you had any business left, Beatrice." "We have information," Richard interjected, stepping forward, trying to channel the arrogance he used to possess. "About the girl. Adela Bennett. Or Blackwood, whatever she calls herself." "She's a maid, Preston," Beatrice said, leaning in close, her voice dripping with poison. "She has no education, no experience. She scrubbed my toilets for 3 years. Do you really think she can manage a $40 billion conglomerate? She's going to crash the market. But if you were to intervene, if we challenged her competency in court with your backing—" "You want me to fund a coup," Preston summarized flatly. "I want to save the economy from a cleaning lady," Beatrice corrected. "And in return, when we regain our assets, The Blackwood shipping lanes are yours." Preston swirled the olive in his glass. He looked bored. "You're offering me things you don't own, Beatrice. That's a dangerous game." "We can win," Richard insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. "We just need a heavy hitter. She's weak. She's a nobody who got lucky." Suddenly, the string quartet stopped playing. The low hum of chatter in the room evaporated. The heavy bronze doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. Adela Blackwood stood at the precipice. She was not wearing the uniform of a maid. She was draped in a gown of deep midnight velvet that absorbed the light, contrasting sharply with her pale skin. The dress was structured, powerful, with a high neckline and a back that plunged low. She wore no necklace. She didn't need one. Her presence was the jewelry. On her right arm was Arthur Lewis, looking frail but triumphant. Adela descended the stairs. She didn't look down to watch her step. She looked straight out at the crowd. Every eye was on her. The silence was absolute, a mixture of fear and reverence. She reached the bottom of the stairs and the crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked with a natural grace, a dignity that couldn't be taught in boarding school. Beatrice felt something inside her snap. The jealousy was a physical pain, a hot coal in her stomach. That was her spotlight. That was her world. Adela was just the help. "You!" Beatrice shrieked. The sound tore through the quiet hall. Beatrice shoved past Preston Clyde and marched into the center of the open floor, intercepting Adela. "You have some nerve showing your face here," Beatrice yelled, her voice echoing off the Egyptian stone. "You fraud! You con artist!" Adela stopped. She looked at Beatrice calmly, as if observing a bug on a windshield. "Good evening, Beatrice. I see you used the severance package I gave your staff to buy a ticket." "Don't you speak to me!" Beatrice screamed, her composure shattering completely. "I know the truth. You faked that DNA test. You bribed Arthur Lewis. You're just a dirty little thief who stole a family crest from the attic. You belong in the servants' quarters, not the Met." Richard ran up behind his mother, emboldened by her rage. "She's right. You're a fake. You think a fancy dress makes you one of us?" The crowd murmured. Phones were out, recording every second. Adela didn't raise her voice. She simply held out her hand, and Arthur Lewis placed a microphone into it. He had anticipated this. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adela said. Her voice was soft, but the sound system carried it to every corner of the room. "I apologize for the disruption. It seems Mrs. Harrington is upset." She took a step closer to Beatrice. "You call me a thief, Beatrice?" Adela asked, her tone conversational but deadly. "That's interesting, because I spent this morning with a team of forensic accountants auditing the books of the Harrington Hope Foundation." Beatrice froze. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. "The Harrington Hope Foundation," Adela continued, turning to address the room. "A charity established to provide scholarships for underprivileged children. A noble cause. Tax exempt." Adela signaled to the wall behind the stage. A massive projector screen, usually used for art displays, flickered to life. A spreadsheet appeared. "This is the ledger for the last 5 years, Adela explained, using a laser pointer. "You raised $12 million from the people in this room, but only 3% of that money went to scholarships." The crowd gasped. "Where did the rest go?" Adela asked. The slide changed. It showed bank transfers to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Heron LLC. "It went here," Adela said, "and from there it was used to pay for, let's see, a private jet rental, a villa in Tuscany, a collection of Hermes bags, and most notably, a $2 million settlement to silence a woman Richard assaulted in 2019. Richard looked like he was going to vomit. That's a lie. That's private." It's not private when you pay for it with stolen charity money, Richard, Adela said, cold as ice. That's called embezzlement, and wire fraud, and tax evasion. Beatrice looked around the room. She saw the faces of the people she had tried to impress. They weren't looking at her with pity anymore. They were looking at her with disgust. She had stolen from them. She had lied to them. You, Beatrice whispered, trembling. You ruined everything. I didn't ruin anything, Adela replied, lowering the microphone slightly so only Beatrice could hear the final blow. I just turned on the lights. You're the one who can't survive the glare. Adela nodded to the main entrance. 4 FBI agents in windbreakers marked Federal Agent marched into the hall. They didn't look at the art. They looked straight at the Harringtons. Beatrice Harrington, Richard Harrington, the lead agent announced, his voice booming. You are under arrest for federal racketeering and grand larceny. No! Beatrice screamed as the agent grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back to cuff her. Preston, tell them. Help me. She looked wildly toward the bar. Preston Clyde watched the arrest unfold. He took the final sip of his martini, set the glass down on a passing waiter's tray, and looked directly at Adela Blackwood. He raised an imaginary hat to her, a gesture of respect from one predator to another. Miss Blackwood, Preston called out smoothly, ignoring Beatrice's screams as she was dragged away. I believe we have some shipping contracts to discuss. Adela looked at the man who had ignored her presence 5 minutes ago. She didn't smile. Call my secretary, Mr. Clyde, Adela said into the microphone before dropping it onto a velvet chair. If you're lucky, I might have 5 minutes for you next month. As the heavy door slammed shut behind the screaming Harringtons, the room remained silent for 1 heartbeat. Then, the applause started. It began with Arthur Lewis, slow and steady, and then swept through the room like wildfire. Adela Blackwood stood alone in the center of the temple, the Emerald Queen of a new era. The war was over, and she had won. The sleek black helicopter cut through the autumn sky, banking sharply over the East River. Inside, Adela Blackwood adjusted her headset, looking down at the sprawling metropolis of New York City. A year ago, she had looked up at these skyscrapers from the sidewalk, worrying about the price of a subway fare. Now, the city looked like a circuit board, and she was the one controlling the current. Miss Blackwood, the pilot's voice crackled in her ear. We are 5 minutes out from the Hamptons. Mr. Lewis is waiting on the helipad. Thank you, Mark, Adela replied. She glanced at the tablet on her lap. It displayed a live stock ticker. Blackwood Sovereign Trust was up 12% this quarter. But the number that mattered to her was different. Clyde Shipping Acquisition. Complete. Just hours ago, she had sat in a boardroom across from Preston Clyde, the man who had laughed at her during the gala. He had tried to bully her, threatening to pull out of the deal if she didn't slash the pensions of the dock workers. Adela had simply slid a folder across the table. It contained satellite photos of his ships dumping waste in protected waters. Sign the deal, Preston, she had said, her voice dropping to that terrifyingly calm register she had mastered. Or I release these to the EPA and the press. You won't just lose the company, you'll lose your freedom. Preston had signed. The billionaire shark had been eaten by the maid. The helicopter touched down on the private pad of what was formerly the Harrington estate. The wind whipped Adela's hair as she stepped out, not into the stiff, fearful atmosphere that used to plague this place, but into chaos. The good kind. The transformation was staggering. The 10-foot iron gates, which once bore the gilded H of the Harringtons, were gone. In their place was an open archway, carved from warm oak. The manicured hedges, once trimmed to within an inch of their lives, were now wilder, dotted with wildflowers. and the noise. For decades, the Harrington estate had been a place of hushed whispers and clinking crystal. Now, it roared with life. Adela walked toward the main house. The grand driveway was lined with easel stands. Children from the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn were painting the sunset, their canvases splashing color against the stark white limestone of the mansion. "You're late," a gruff voice called out. Arthur Lewis sat in his wheelchair on the veranda, wrapped in a thick tartan blanket. He looked older, his skin like parchment, but his eyes were sharp as tacks. "I was acquiring an empire, Arthur. Give me a break." Adela smiled, bending down to kiss his cheek. "Preston Clyde?" He folded. "Good," Arthur grunted. He was always a pompous fool. But never mind business. Look at this. He gestured with a trembling hand toward the lawn, where Beatrice Harrington used to host her exclusive garden parties, events where a spilled drink could cost a waiter their job. A soccer game was in full swing. The goalposts were makeshift, and the grass was getting torn up. Beatrice would have a stroke if she saw the grass, Adela noted, a hint of dark amusement in her voice. "Beatrice is currently worrying about other things," Arthur said, pulling a letter from his pocket. "This arrived from upstate this morning." Adela took the envelope. It was stamped with the seal of the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. She didn't open it. "What does it say?" "The usual," Arthur sighed. "She claims she was framed. She claims you bribed the judge. She wants you to visit her. Apparently, she believes that if she explains her side, you'll release her." "She still thinks she's the victim," Adela said, staring at the envelope. "After everything." "Narcissists don't change, Adela. They just change their address." Arthur took the letter back. "And Richard?" "I keep tabs," Adela said quietly. "He lost the job at the car wash. Too much back talk to the manager. He's delivering food now. DoorDash on a bicycle in Jersey City." "Justice," Arthur murmured. "Reality," Adela corrected. "He's finally living in the real world. It's the best education he's ever had." Adela walked into the house. The grand foyer, with its marble double staircase, had always felt like a mausoleum to her. She remembered scrubbing these stairs with a toothbrush because Beatrice said the vacuum missed the corners. Now, the marble was covered in scuff marks from sneakers. The walls, once adorned with portraits of Harrington ancestors who had made their money in the slave trade and opium smuggling, were now covered in student art. She walked into the great hall, the site of the vase incident. The memory hit her viscerally. She could almost smell the stale wine and hear the shattering porcelain. She could feel the shame burning her cheeks as Beatrice humiliated her in front of 300 people. "Miss Adela!" A small body slammed into her legs. Adela stumbled, but caught her balance, looking down. It was Leo, a 6-year-old boy from the foster care program the foundation supported. He was holding a violin bow like a sword, and he looked terrified. Behind him, on the floor, lay a music stand, knocked over in his haste. I didn't mean to," Leo stammered, his eyes welling up. He flinched, instinctively raising his arm as if expecting a blow. Adela's heart broke. She knew that flinch. She had done it herself for years. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the expensive silk of her trousers. She took Leo's hands gently. "Hey, look at me," she whispered. Leo looked up, trembling. "Did you break the violin?" "No, just the stand fell." "Is anyone hurt?" "No, Mom." Adela smiled, wiping a smudge of dirt from his cheek. "Then it's not a problem. In this house, we don't get in trouble for accidents. We just pick it up and try again." She stood up and helped him right the stand. "Now go practice. I want to hear that song by dinner." Leo beamed, the terror vanishing instantly, replaced by awe. Yes, Miss Adela." He ran off. Adela watched him go, feeling a weight lift off her chest that she hadn't realized was still there. That was the final exorcism. The ghost of Beatrice Harrington was gone. "You're good at that." Adela turned. Her grandmother, Martha, was standing in the doorway of the library. She leaned on a cane, but she looked stronger than she had in years. The best doctors in New York had managed to treat her heart condition, giving her a second wind. "Grandma," Adela went over and offered her arm. "I didn't know you were here." "I like the library," Martha said, walking slowly with Adela toward the massive window overlooking the estate. "I used to read about places like this in books. I never thought I'd own one." "It's yours, Grandma. It was always supposed to be yours. Mum wanted you to be safe." Martha stopped and looked at Adela. Her eyes were serious. "Your mother ran away from this life, Adela. She was afraid the money would rot her soul. She was afraid it would make her like them." Adela tightened her grip on her grandmother's arm. "Do you think it has? Am I like them?" It was the question that kept Adela awake at night. She had destroyed the Harringtons. She had blackmailed Preston Clyde. She wielded power with a ruthlessness that scared even her own lawyers sometimes. Was she becoming the monster she fought? Martha reached up and cupped Adela's face. Her hands were rough, calloused from decades of hard work. Hands that Adela had inherited. "A Harrington would have fired that boy for running in the hall," Martha said softly. "A Harrington would have kept the gates closed. You turned a fortress into a sanctuary, Adela. Your mother, she was afraid of the fire. But you walked through the fire and came out holding water for everyone else." Tears pricked Adela's eyes. "It's hard, Grandma. Sometimes I want to just scream, to burn it all down." "That's the Blackwood temper," Martha chuckled. "Use it. But keep the Bennett heart. That's your legacy. The name Blackwood opens the doors, but the name Bennett is what keeps them open." They stood in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The laughing of the children outside began to fade as the dinner bell rang. Adela took a deep breath. She thought about the brownstone in Queens, which she still slept in every night. She thought about the lawsuit papers she had burned. She thought about the maid uniform she kept in the back of her closet, a reminder of where she came from. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't a nobody. Adela Blackwood was the storm that cleared the air. "Come on," Adela said, straightening her blazer. "Let's go eat. I heard the chef is making mac and cheese. And if I don't get there first, Leo is going to eat it all." Martha laughed, a sound of pure joy. "After you, boss." Adela walked out of the library, leaving the shadows behind her. The house was bright, noisy, and imperfect. It was finally home. And that is the story of Adela Blackwood. It serves as a brutal reminder to the elites of the world. Be careful who you step on. The person scrubbing your floors today might be the one signing your eviction notice tomorrow. Beatrice and Richard Harrington learned the hard way that arrogance is a loan with a very high interest rate, and eventually life comes to collect. Adela didn't just win a lawsuit. She redefined what it means to be powerful. She showed us that true legacy isn't about the gold on your crest, but the grace in your heart. She took the stones thrown at her and built a castle for those who had nothing. Wow, I still get chills thinking about that courtroom scene. What do you guys think? Did Adela show too much mercy to Richard by letting him struggle in the real world? Or was that the ultimate revenge? And what would you do if you found $1 billion secret in your attic? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of justice, betrayal, and redemption, please destroy that like button. It helps us bring more of these stories to life. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a massive story dropping next week about a CEO who went undercover in his own factory and discovered a secret that nearly cost him his life. You do not want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. And remember, kindness is free, but karma has a receipt. See you next time.